Good morning, everyone. Well, I am Reverend Karen LeBlanc. I minister to this church here. Welcome to First Unitarian. This church that Maggie so loved, in which she was so involved for 55 years. I know. Whew. Tell me about it. Wow. When you talk about a pillar of the church, that was Maggi Peirce. Any longtime member here will tell you that if you're here that long, you have served on every committee. And she did. She served on the board. She was the president of the Women's Alliance. She created some cool footstools along with other women of our church, as you can see up front. That's one of Maggie's there. She helped us to choose the new ministers of this church. And of course, she led TriWorks Coffee House upstairs in our auditorium for 35 years, where she provided a space for musicians and singers and poets and storytellers to share and develop their talents. Maggie created a real community here, and memories, so many memories that are cherished by so many folks. And a lot of her TriWorks kids are here today, and I'm sure all of these kids don't feel or look like kids anymore, but you know she still called you her kids. Maggie was an exceptional storyteller and a voracious reader. And there was never a moment in which our conversations weren't rich and satisfying. When I had the honor to start serving this church in 2015, Maggie was my gauge to let me know how I was doing. Like me, Maggie could never really hide on her face what was happening in her heart and mind, right? This was actually a great gift as a new minister. So, as well as Ken's notes were also a great gift as a new minister. Thank you, Ken. Those will come up again. So if I looked over at Maggie, right over here and right where Nina's sitting, and she had that crooked smile on her face that went all the way to her eyes, I knew I was giving a good sermon that was engaging. When she became expressionless, I was boring her. I knew that. When her mouth got tight and her eyebrows went up a little bit, she disagreed with what I was saying, and she would likely bring that up to me later. And if she fell asleep, I knew I needed to up my game and get better topics and definitely work on my delivery. She told me I was good at this job, and that meant the world to me, and it gave me great confidence. That's the kind of confidence that fuels me to this day, and I'm going to miss my friend Maggie very much. So I've sat with numerous people who were dying, and I have never seen anyone ever face death like Maggi Peirce, and I wanted to share this with you because I think it might help with the healing. So when she went into the hospital on Halloween, I went to see her. When I got to her room, I said, "Hey, Maggie, I hear you are not doing well, my friend." And she smiled hugely and said, "Actually, I'm terrific." And it stopped me short. "Terrific?" I said, "Really?" And she said, "Karen, I've lived at least 10 years longer than I thought I would and 5 years longer than I wanted to." She said, "I can't wait to go home." So we said a prayer together and talked about the end of life with the kind of curiosity that she showed in anything she was ever interested in. She said, "Oh, I really hope I get to see my sister and my parents and such. But what I mostly want to find out is, do I get to know everything? Will it all be revealed?" I said, "You want the answer to life, the universe, and everything, Maggie?" And she said, "Oh, yes, that would be wonderful." So we spoke for an hour of things large and small, unencumbered by any fears, knowing where this was all leading very soon. And I will carry that conversation that I had with Maggi Peirce to my grave. I have never walked out of such a room where I thought someone was dying, feeling energized, and feeling energized instead of the emotional depletion and sadness that usually happens when you sit with someone who's on their way out. But you know what? I was happy for Maggi. I was inspired by her incredible grace, and I was so thankful to have known this amazing person as I left that hospital. So I hope that my friend Maggi, who I love and respect so much, knows all the answers now to life, the universe, and everything. And though we grieve her loss, we are not about to let the shadow of death obscure the beautiful, amazing life that Maggi Peirce lived. Not today. She will be sorely missed, but her life was long and satisfying, and we know that Maggi's memory and spirit will live on in every person here, and so many others, in so many different ways. And her memory will always be honored here in this church. Her stick will be right here in the pulpit with me to remind me. So today we appreciate and give tribute to the effect that she has had on so many people's lives. And today we will celebrate Maggi's life with music and poems and stories just as she wanted. So thank you for being with here to celebrate with us today. We are going to have Lily and Charlotte light our chalice in the spirit of the Unitarian Universalist tradition. So today this will be a symbol of the light that Maggi brought into this church and into the world. All right, thank you, everybody. Thanks, James. Now I want you to be aware that Maggi provided all the details of this service. So we're just doing what she wants. So if you will rise in body or spirit as you are able and sing with us hymn number 101, Abide with Me. Please be seated. Our first reading, Maggi Peirce. Are you going to read from down there, Maggi? Okay. Adjust the mic as you need.
Who will go drive with Fergus now, and pierce the deep wood's woven shade, and dance upon the level shore? Young man, lift up your russet brow, and lift your tender eyelids, maid, and brood on hopes and fear no more. And no more turn aside and brood upon love's bitter mystery, for Fergus rules the brazen cars, and rules the shadows of the wood, and the white breast of the dim sea, and all disheveled wandering stars.
Now, Matt Davis, Maggie's good friend, you want to come up here, Matt?
Good morning, everybody. I met Maggie 48 years ago at what is now UMass Dartmouth. I was 18 years old, and Maggie was a 44-year-old housewife and mother who decided to go to college and earn a bachelor's degree in German. By chance, we were sitting beside one another in a freshman English class. One day, to illustrate good versus poor writing, our professor was reading samples from our papers. And she was reading something from Maggie's paper, and she stopped and paused and said, "Maggie, there's a word in your essay that I don't understand. Biff. What's a biff?" And Maggie looked and said, "Do you not know what a biff is? It's a wee smack." And she took her notebook and whacked me over the head with it. When I stopped seeing stars, a friendship was born. At the university, Maggie found the whole process of scheduling and registering for her each semester's courses to be very muddling, as she would say. And so I always had to help her plan her schedule. As she would stare blankly at me, I'd advise her, "Now, Maggie, you need to take at least one humanities course, and you should get your social science requirements out of the way." She began to refer to me as her manager and depended on me to be sure that she'd covered all of her degree requirements. At the start of every semester, we'd attend the first session of several classes together to see whether we liked a professor's lecturing style. We usually agreed on whether we wanted to continue with the course or drop it and find something else. However, one notable exception to that was psychology, which was my major. Maggie was not a fan of psychology and made that abundantly clear, repeating, "I hate bloody psychology," like a mantra whenever the topic came up. Ironically, I noticed that Maggie loved to speculate about the motivations and behavior of the people that we knew. She'd say, "I found it psychologically fascinating that so-and-so reacted that way." Then she'd quickly add, "But of course, I hate psychology." I often used to refer to her as Dr. Peirce when she would engage in these behavioral analyses, and we'd share a good laugh together. After college, I moved away from Massachusetts and spent the next 40 years in California. While that sort of distance would challenge most friendships, ours remained strong. We faithfully wrote to one another, we often spoke on the phone, and I returned to the area several times a year for visits, and Maggie visited me a couple of times in California. Our friendship never seemed to miss a beat. We always just seemed to pick up exactly where we'd left off. During my visits home, we had a few traditions. We loved sharing lunch at Margaret's restaurant in Fairhaven, and we shared our passion for ice cream with visits to Erickson's and Carver or the Acushnet Creamery. We enjoyed seeing the more artsy or foreign films in Boston and Providence. We'd have tea out on her beautiful lawn during the warm weather or go for long rides in the country. And I always included a visit to Maggie as I made my holiday rounds at Thanksgiving and Christmas. Over the years, I learned a lot of Ulster slang words from Maggie that have become part of my vocabulary. The bathroom became the jakes. Foolish people were bloody nits, Egypts, or right gits. Gluttonous people were dirty gorbs. And if something made you want to boke, it meant that you wanted to vomit. Deceitful or shady dealings were jiggery pokery, and misbehaving children were wee lima satans. and Maggie frequently would punctuate her speech with the use of the word dear, sometimes affectionately, sometimes rather patronizingly. If you knew Maggie well, you knew that she could be extremely opinionated and blunt. Many years ago, I gave her a music CD by Enya as a Christmas gift, thinking that Maggie might appreciate this Celtic artist from Ireland. A few weeks later, I casually asked her how she'd liked it, but I wasn't really prepared for her answer. "It was dreadful, dear. Absolutely dreadful. I loathed it. It's music to sup porridge by." I love that line. I gave it away to another friend who likes the woman. God only knows what he sees in her. Don't ever give me anything by her again. She's dreadful. Maggie loved muffins, but they had to come from the Honeydew donut shops. I'd incur her wrath if I ever dared to stop at a Dunkin' Donuts, which, like Enya, she found dreadful. I often fantasized about tossing a couple of Dunkin' muffins into a Honeydew bag to see if she could really discern the difference, but I decided that was a risky proposition. One of my favorite memories of Maggie telling it like it is was when we were at a movie theater watching endless trailers for upcoming films. As the last trailer ended, in the hushed silence of the theater, Maggie bellowed for all to hear, "Well, I won't be rushing out to see any of those movies anytime soon, dear." They all look absolutely dreadful. Though I agreed with her assessment, I found myself shrinking into my seat a little bit as people turned and chuckled. As I'm sure you all know, Maggie was a renowned storyteller, and I attended more of her performances than I can remember. I was always amazed that despite all of her accomplishments and successes, before a show, she'd fret about how it would go. She'd worry that no one would attend and that the audience would consist of 2 men, a wee lad, and a dog, or moan that no one would be interested in her stories. Of course, the performances were often standing room only, and I watched her skillfully pull her audience in and captivate them. She had a truly wonderful gift, and I'm so glad that many of her stories are still available on tape and CD so that I can continue to listen to them and to hear her voice now that she's gone. Over the last few years, Maggie railed mightily against the technological age, and I became her manager once again, writing step-by-step instructions for her on how to play a VHS tape or a DVD. But the computer was her mortal enemy, and I fielded many panicked phone calls from her when a pop-up window blocked the email she was trying to read, the font on a letter that she was composing suddenly changed over to boldface or italics if she'd hit the wrong button, or a printer jammed or ran out of ink. Sometimes I was able to guide her through these crises over the phone, but usually solving the issue required a house call. She'd sigh with relief, call me her manager, and remind me just how much she hated the computer. Maggie and I were very different in a number of fundamental ways. There was nearly a 30-year age difference between us. We'd come from vastly different cultural backgrounds and upbringings. We had different musical tastes, different hobbies and interests, and we frequently clashed over politics and religious views. I was always amused and a little bit frustrated when she'd end a discussion by telling me exactly how she felt about an issue, concluding with, "And we won't discuss this again, dear," before I'd had a chance to actually state my opinion. I see that some of you recognize this. But I think that's an important thing, an important lesson about friendship. Just because we have differences doesn't mean that we can't have meaningful and cherished relationships. Maggie and I did share a love of good food and travel. We had a similar sense of humor and a tendency to see the absurdities of life. We comforted and encouraged one another through some of the trials that life dealt each of us, and ultimately we shared a deep love and affection for one another that lasted for the 48 years that we knew one another. It's going to take a long time for me to process that Maggie is really gone, and I'll miss her more than I can imagine right now. I hope that she's at peace, in a place that's free from computers, free from psychology, free from music by Enya, and I hope that she no longer needs her old manager, Matt. I hope that her spirit is flying free over the Mourne Mountains of Northern Ireland that she loves so much, or that she's reunited with her parents and her beloved sister, Dot. I'm very, very grateful for the huge role she played in my life, and for the countless memories I have of her. Goodbye, Maggie, my dear friend. Thank you.
Eliza, Maggie's granddaughter.
So like Karen, I also learned how to public speak here and always got some solid feedback to enunciate, to talk slowly, and I hope that I do my grandmother that honor. Yankees come home. No, this is not how you find out that my grandmother was an avid baseball fan. Though she did play field hockey as a girl, she was not really one for sports. This was her clever protest sign, a play on the slogan, "Yankees go home," shouted around the globe. She held this sign as she proudly stood at the intersection of Kempton and Route 18 as part of an anti-war protest in New Bedford in 2003. She was proud to be standing against the US Empire's second invasion of Iraq, proud to stand with me, her grandchild, who at 14 organized my first protest, and of course, my granny was there. The next summer, we volunteered together regularly with the Coalition for Social Justice, phone banking on behalf of Kerr, because we knew that Bush had to go, and neither of us were eligible to vote. This was how we were going to influence the election. Ohio, the state that we were making calls into, it turned blue that election. And while we were sitting with the stark reality of another 4 years of Bush under the Patriot Act and No Child Left Behind, knowing that we had made a small difference together was some consolation. It was sometime during this time period that my grandmother, I began hearing this statement from her, and maybe you've heard it too, because we all know that Maggie was good for a maxim. If you want to change anything, you've got to go into politics. So, as a teenager, I had this plan that I'd become a House representative, a senator, and then at 35, I would become a president. This past election was the first one I would have been eligible. I have learned better. I don't want to be a war criminal, but maybe one day I'll run for city council. Who knows? And so, even though I didn't go the electoral route, I did heed my grandmother's statement, and I went into politics as a community and cultural organizer, just like my gran. I've organized countless protests since that first one, worked towards reclaiming the commons with art and music, and creating a culture of mutual aid, advancing racial, gender, and economic justice, and always building community and welcoming people in. In a conversation the better part of a decade ago, Granny said, "If you've got an ounce of my blood in you, you'll be a good organizer." And I am, because of her and the seeds she planted and the path that she modeled for so many of us. During Granny's last month on this earthly plane, I witnessed her belief systems continue into action. From extending an invitation to a timid onlooker eavesdropping on one of our conversations, to Granny sharing about being somewhere earlier in the fall that was severely understaffed one day, such to the point that she thought a strike was going on. Granny was always one for a union, and so she mustered up her strength to get up, make it to the hall, and said, "Is this a strike? I'll help." I know, right? And that's my granny, wanting the best for people, for the right to health care, housing, workers' rights, decent and dignified wages. She wanted people to be taken care of, to find belonging, to connect with one another, and to see the wonder in the world around us. So, in honor of my dear Gran, in honor of our Maggie, do that. Whether it's in the parish hall today with someone you've never met, or in the coming weeks, the world needs the kind of love grandmothers share with us, so act like the world's grandmother for all of our sakes, in Maggie's honor.
Who's going to read next? Come on.
Hello.
Make sure you get right on that microphone.
Okay. All year round, the wind can show a blossom or two, but it's in full bloom now, as if the small yolk stain from all the birds' eggs in, all the nests of the spring, were spiked and hung everywhere on bushes to ripen. Hills oxidized gold, above the smolder of green shoots and dross of dead thorns underfoot, the blossoms scald. Put a match under. Winds, they go up all of a sudden. They make no flame in the sun, but a fierce heat tremor. Yet, incineration like that only takes the thorn. The tough sticks don't burn, remain like bone, charred, horn. Jilt, jaggy, springly, frilled, this stunned dry richness persists on hills, near stone ditches, over flint bed and battlefield.
Thanks, Ruth. Cora, my dear, my darling.
My mother meant a lot to a lot of different people, different kinds of people, people that came from all walks of life, from all corners of the planet. And she gave me the greatest gift. She always made us kind of jealous of the fact that she had all of these cousins, and she had aunties and uncles, and Hank and I had one. And they were over in England, so we only got to see them a half dozen times until Facebook arrived. Then all of a sudden I got to know my cousins a little bit better. But it was the value of friendship. That's what my mother taught me. Her dear friend Barbara Carnes, all of her children and their children became my cousins, became my sisters, my brothers, my safe place. The children that we grew up with within these walls at this church, they became my trusted confidants. The friends that I made at Triworks Coffee House are the ones that will always know those chapters. We don't even have to speak about the chapters anymore. We're just really glad we're still here. And I look back and I wonder, you know, what is my mother's legacy? And people will go, oh, she's got books, she's got CDs, she's got things on Kindle. And I'm like, oh no, she has taught us the value of friendship. There was a song that Jane Voss, a dear friend and performer, had taught her, and I'm just gonna sing you the first verse, because it was something that when I had any traumas of the world, which I had plenty of them, it really got me through a lot. I have traveled this world over, there's lots I've seen and done. One thing I know I understand, you may seek after riches or the fame of all the land, but there's nothing to the love of one good friend. Don't let a good friend go down. Now, as I look around, I see faces from my world, from my life. Beverly Passarelli, Belle DeBarros, Beth Simonsis. Those are people that are still talking to me after decades of knowing me. And I look around and I see people that met my mother when they were 18 and kept her tight in their hearts. I think of the people that she met through Triworks. And not only the Triworks kids, you're all older than me now, and I think of the performers. I think of David Jones and John and Tony and Murray Callahan at the English Music Hall, and how that was her world. How Norman Kennedy wove her actually a beautiful shawl that she is buried with today. And she loved each and every one of them. She loved to go to her poetry group. She loved to call up George and analyze the universe, or I don't know why you gave me that book to read. You know, she was great in the sense that she inspired us all. And she had, her demise took a few weeks, and yet it was wonderful because she was able to tell each and every one of us not only what she loved and appreciated in us, but also what she hoped for the future. So I hope that you must remember, because one of the great gifts that my mother had was her friendship. And it didn't matter if she met you 5 years ago, 50 years ago, 90 years ago, she valued you. And so just remember, when you think that the world's really small, there's another person that will be your friend and is just waiting for you to say hello.
Let us pray, my friends. Source of all, who holds the power of life and death in your hands and connects us all in the web of life, hear us today as a people gathered to share our sadness for the loss of our beloved friend, mother, wife, grandmother, great-grandmother. Hear our heart's silent sorrow as we say goodbye to Maggie, who was so admired and loved by her family and friends and will be so profoundly missed in our lives. We ask you, O God of all humanity, to receive Maggie into your presence. Surround her with the love and light from which she came and to which all of us will someday return. Be with us as we celebrate the time she spent on this earth today, remembering the great joy she has brought to so many lives. We ask you, O God of every mercy, to lay your healing hand on the hurting hearts of all those who grieve her. Be a constant and comforting presence to Cora, Hank, Eliza, James, Millie, and all her family and friends. They are hurting right now. May they find the support they need within this loving community gathered here. Silent stillness, lift our spirits now into the light of a life well lived, and keep Maggie's memory alive in our hearts and minds and in this sacred place always. Amen. on up, Hank.
Thank you, Reverend Karen. Thank you, Randy, who got quite a workout playing these tunes that my mom has chosen. Once upon a time, when the geese drank wine and the monkeys chewed tobacco up a tree. That's how my mom started every story. Well, many of the stories that she told my sister and I, it is how her father started stories for her and her sister. My mother grew up attending the Bloomfield Presbyterian Church. And as a child, she and her mom and her sister sat in the balcony. And once a month, when they had communion, they would continue to sit in the balcony while everyone else on the floor went and received communion, while the people around them went and received communion. And my mother said that she asked her mother why that was, why they didn't go. And her mother said, "They are the sheep, and we are the goats." In Calvinism, which is the basis of the Presbyterian Church and in even our church to some extent, our Unitarian Universalism, who is elect and who is not is prime discussion. Who is in and who is out, who is right and who is wrong. That Calvinism gets into your bones, it changes your DNA. Her whole life, my mom had this little inner Puritan. You can imagine like a little pilgrim on her shoulder. And she struggled with it because she wanted to live her authentic life. That's who was on the other shoulder. And she struggled with that between those two her whole life. Mom hated being told what to do, especially if what she had to do was because of social convention. As a child, we had a book of children's poems that we would read, and one time while practicing my reading to my mom, I read this little poem, Mrs. Mason bought a basin. Mrs. Tyson said, "Oh, what a nice one." "How much did it cost?" said Mrs. Frost. "Half a crown," said Mrs. Brown. "Did it indeed?" said Mrs. Reed. "It did for certain," said Mrs. Burton. Then Mrs. Nix, up to her tricks, threw the basin on the bricks. And I remember saying to my mom that Mrs. Nix was very naughty. And my mother said, "I'm Mrs. Nix." Mom wrestled with that inner Puritan and how she wanted to be in the world. Not who she wanted to be. She knew who she was, but she wasn't sure how she could be who she wanted to be in this world. And to be honest, Mom wasn't always sure what she wanted in this world, but she knew what she didn't want. The stories of my mom being blunt and not suffering fools gladly are legendary. Here at this lovely church filled with people that she loved were one family who my mom would refer to as Mr. and Mrs. Nice. They were always very nice. And we heard this from a third party, that at one point the church, when I was a teenager, was really pushing everyone wearing name tags. And my mom, so this was early in my punk rock stages, so I put a name tag on that said like Sal Putrid or something like that, right? And Mrs. Nice saw my name tag and thought that wasn't very nice. And that she went to tell my mother about my name tag, and as she got closer, she saw that my mother's name tag read Lizzie Borden. My mom was not always easy to be around. Until I was in my mid-teens, my friends never wanted to come to our house to hang out. Never wanted to come to our house to hang out. On Facebook, actually, one of our neighbor friends told how mom had caught her picking her daffodils, and my mom, and she said, I never stole anything ever again in my life after the tongue lashing I got. In the early days of the Triworks Coffee House, my mother had knives pulled on her by drug dealers, and a gun pulled on by someone who was trying to rob the front door of the coffee house. And what did my mom do? She snatched those weapons away from them, saying, "How dare you do that?" And with the person with a gun, she said, "What would your mother think?" Years later, in seminary, I remember sharing with a group of friends. We were all talking about how our parents punished us, and people talked about their father and the belt, or their mother and a Hot Wheels track. And I said that my mother would punish us she would discover that we'd done something wrong, and then she'd send us into the scullery to get out a wooden spoon. And then we'd return back to her with a wooden spoon, and she'd take the wooden spoon, and she'd say, "Hold out your hand." And she'd say, "Now, how many whacks do you think you deserve?" And we'd have this, I would say 3, and she'd say, "I was thinking more like 10, and then we'd have to barter back and forth. And I remember, as I shared this with my friends in seminary, one of my friends who had been beaten with a Hot Wheels track said, he's like, "Oh, that's psychological. I don't like that at all. That's cruel to children." My mother loved Triworks. She loved this church. She loved all of you. My mother said yes to becoming the director of Triworks with 2 stipulations. One, that there would be no committees, and that she could run it as a matriarchal dictatorship. Because my mother missed her cousins so, and her sister, and her good friends in the folk music scene in Edinburgh, I cannot tell you how much my mom loved her cousins. There was no greater joy when I came back from visiting them, and just being able to tell her that I had seen her cousins and knew them. When my mom moved here, she discovered that my father was an only child. And so, since she did not have access to her cousins and her friends, that she made them. She made the community. And it's so many of you, her Triworks kids, who have kept her together, who have visited her and driven her. I want to make sure that Zach gets called out as just one of my mom's greatest friends. My mom loved being with people that she loved. She loved being with a bunch of weirdos, authentic weirdos. My mother did not suffer posers well either. She loved all of you. When my mom went to the hospital on Halloween, Cora called me, and I drove down, and we thought she won't last the night or the next few days. And then we were able to move her in with my dad at Sipacan. And people started to visit. And every time they visited, Mom got a little bit better, a little bit cheerier. Then Cora and I said, if she's ever going to die, we've got to stop these visitors from happening. The arc of my mother's life went from being a child born in the Second World War, wrestling with her inner Puritan, to a woman lying in her hospital bed and giving out blessings to her friends and her family, as Cora has said. And as Cora has also said, Mom was ready to go for years. She was so happy to be finally dying. She was giving out blessings and giving advice and not opinions, and saying to everyone, ask me a question. Ask me any question that you want to know about. And now Mom has passed on to that great mystery that awaits us all. If you asked my mom if she believed in God, she would say no. But then she would tell you of seeing her sister and her mother making tea, and of a little black cat playing around the foot of her bed. Well, I'm sure of God, and I'm sure that one day all of us will be with Mom. Godspeed, Mom, and thank you for blessing us with your life. As Karen said, this whole service was planned by my mom, including our next hymn. This next hymn was written by a Presbyterian minister who was going blind, and when he told his fiancée that he was going blind, she left him, and so he wrote this song in response. A lovely story, lovely words. The name of the tune of this hymn is Saint Margaret, and I'm not sure if it was the tune, the story, or the title why my mom chose it, but this is our next hymn. Please rise as you are able. It is the hymn is there in your order of service.
Have a seat, everyone. That was a really nice hymn. Thanks, Maggie. Our closing words this morning are taken from tomorrow. Tomorrow we will be reading in this sanctuary A Child's Christmas in Wales, and it will be dedicated to Maggi Peirce's honor and memory. And George told me last night that Maggie used to read A Child's Christmas in Wales here. I did not know that, and so did Bill Van Voris. I've heard that too, so I guess I'm carrying on this great tradition of A Child's Christmas in Wales in this space. So please come and join us at 11 a.m. tomorrow if you'd like to. Got to get in a little plug. So I'm going to read for you the last paragraph of A Child's Christmas in Wales, which I feel is very, very fitting. Always on Christmas night there was music. An uncle played the fiddle, a cousin sang Cherry Ripe, another uncle sang Drake's drum. It was very warm in the little house. Auntie Hannah, who had got onto the parsnip wine, sang a song about bleeding hearts and death, and then another in which she said her heart was like a bird's nest, and then everybody laughed again, and then I went to bed. Looking through my bedroom window out into the moonlight and in the unending smoke-colored snow, I could see the lights in the windows of all the other houses on our hill and hear the music rising up from the long, steady falling night. I turned the gas down. I got into bed. I said some words to the close and holy darkness, and then I slept. May the courage of the early morning's dawning be with you, the strength of the eternal hills be with you, the peace of the evening's ending be with you, and the love of life be in our hearts today and always. Go in peace, my friends. Come and join us downstairs for a reception after we sing our final musical benediction, ending this session as Maggie always ended these kinds of sessions and more, with Wild Mountain Time, and I believe Joan Aiken is going to lead us. Joan, come on up.
Maggie booked this gig with me about 20 years ago. Oh, the summertime is come, and the trees are sweetly blooming, and the wild mountain thyme, all the valleys are perfuming. Will you go, lassie, go? And we'll all go together to pull wild mountain thyme all around the bloomin' heather. Will you go, lassie, go? I will build my love a bower by yon clear crystal fountain. And on it I will plant all the flowers of the mountain. Will you go, lassie, go? And we'll all go together to pull wild mountain thyme all around the bloomin' heather. Will you go, lassie, go? If my true love, she won't come, I will surely find another to pull wild mountain thyme all around the bloomin' heather. Will you go, lassie, go? And we'll all go together to pull wild mountain thyme all around the bloomin' heather. Will you go, lassie, go? Given to Maggie by Francie McPeak, Belfast, 1947.